Hello there, and welcome to another of Andre's Artist Profiles. Now, today, I'm going to be profiling an artist that I really didn't know a whole lot about until about 3 or 4 years ago. I really hadn't heard him sing, even, until what happened was, my dad got a copy of the Roxy music album, Avalon. And I was then exposed to the music of Bryan Ferry here. And of course, today's his birthday, so I'm going to be profiling Bryan. Bryan Ferry was actually on the cover earlier this year of Wax Poetic magazine. Actually, had an article written up about him in that. And that's a magazine that generally caters to R&B, jazz, soul, world music, and hip-hop, funk fans. And the reason for that is because, at a time where, rock and roll was very much about the blues and, a lot of theatrics and bigness, Bryan Ferry liked to dress in suits and slick his hair back and really specialized in soft insinuation. You could say that he and Roxy Music were glam rock pioneers. Now, I know a lot of people say Brian Eno actually had a lot to do with that, but Bryan Ferry here was in all the lineups of Roxy Music there were, and he's had a wonderful solo career. Now, I don't have every single Bryan Ferry solo album. I wish I did. Just matter of the belt not being as loose as I would like it to be, of course. Record collectors often face that. But I've been rambling on for almost 2 minutes, so I could go on about Bryan Ferry and this really soulful guy from the rock world. Anyway, this is... actually, he doesn't really have a category. He's just Bryan Ferry. He's just an amazingly individual talent. Anyway, this is Bryan Ferry, In Your Mind. I believe this is his third solo album from 1977. It's the remastered edition. See on the spine. Wonderful album. Bryan Ferry had a really unique vocal style and songwriting ability. And this album is very much an extension off of Roxy Music in a way, as I think his first solo albums were. I don't have them, but when he has a birthday next year, I'll probably cover those, if I can locate those albums at a reasonable price. So, here's the follow-up, I believe, The Bride Stripped Bare, from 1978, I believe. Now, by the time this album came out, Roxy Music always used, elegant models like that on their album covers. By this time, Bryan Ferry was, in a position of slickening up his sound even more and emphasizing soul and funk in his productions more than usual, so there was that. I believe this is the next album, Boys and Girls, 1985. Now, I never expected to find this album. I can't get over how stylish he is. And, that look he has right there, the album is actually like that. And he was actually a new wave, new romantic innovator. That mixture of glam rock with soul funk slickness. I mean, his music was always really cleanly done, really well played, a little dark sometimes and noirish, but that's Bryan Ferry. He was just the epitome of cool. And this album couldn't be any more mid-80s cool if there ever was such a thing. It's just really good. 1988, Bayanor, I think it's pronounced. This is another album from 1988, similar to Boys and Girls on Reprise. Very good album, very much in the same vein. Okay, this is Bryan Ferry's Roxy Music's Greatest Hits, Street Life, 20 Great Hits. I got this at the Goodwill before I had any Roxy Music in my collection. And it has, of course, their version of Jealous Guy on it, which was primarily the reason why I got this, because, you really can't find that anywhere but on their albums. But this, was cheap, and it was Bryan Ferry, so I figured I'd just get that. Okay, now, on this blog, video, or whatever, the artist profile, I decided to review Roxy Music. I was going to do them for Brian Eno's birthday, but I had some other plans for Bryan, so since Bryan Ferry has been around for all of Roxy Music, I'm going to include him, okay? This is Roxy Music, their first album from 1972. Came out roughly around the same time as David Bowie was doing Ziggy Stardust, and Lou Reed was doing Transformer. But there was something really elegant about the way this album was produced. It was totally different than what anybody else was doing in the music scene, on the rock world. They really loved to experiment with different methods of cleanness in their production. They loved glamour, and you can see by the cover. This album has a very glamorous atmosphere. It isn't filled with a lot of tremendously loud guitars. They try to make things very, 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 sleek. And that's one thing I love about them. They're a very sleek group, Yet they're not soft somehow. And I don't know how to describe this album, actually. It's a very unique record, and there's a really unique lyrical vibe on here. Very imaginative and dreamy and sometimes subversive, really. This is their second, and this is called For Your Pleasure, and this is from 1973. And they had a very famous song on here called Do the Strand. This was their last album recorded with Brian Eno. I don't know if I can open it up and show you this, but that's how the band appeared during that time. You can see how much they really emphasize, slickness, they're really all kind of about a look. It's definitely the glammiest, I would say, of glam rock. They're definitely a glam rock group, you could say, but they're probably the glammiest of the glam. And the most unique in a lot of ways. Okay, this is their first album without Brian Eno, Stranded, from 1973. Another one of their famous model-type covers. You gotta go in there. That album. This is their 1975 album. You see the side of it. It says Siren. Now, they had a really successful song on here called Love is the Drug, which was later covered by Grace Jones on her Warm Leatherette album. But this is not about Grace Jones. That's a whole other artist profile. But Roxy Music by this time were starting to get hits, and their sound was really starting to emphasize soul and funk a lot more. And this album was actually somewhat of a part of that. Now, a couple years later, they released this album, Country Life, in 1974. And, of course, this is one of their most famous covers. It's very, very controversial, of course. And I think this is the ultimate Roxy Music experience. I think most people into Roxy Music really love that album. I can't disagree with them. It's such a classic. Okay, now, Bryan Ferry had a solo career, and this is the next thing that really came out, Manifesto, in 1979. This album is pretty much a full-on soul and funk kind of rap, really more or less on the line of what the Talking Heads did on Remain in Light, only, not as African, but in a similar mode, I suppose some of the dancer material could be said, oh, they're going disco, but, Bryan Ferry's interest in soul music really took a strong precedence on this album. And their next album in 1980, Flesh and Blood, did that even more so. By the time they're doing this, they're actually covering The Midnight Hour, Wilson Pickett's song. So they've got a pretty strong thing going there. I don't have Avalon. I'm sorry. I haven't gotten around to getting that yet. I don't know why. That's their classic. But anyway. That's basically my collection of Roxy Music and Bryan Ferry. I know I keep using a lot of the same terminology, that he was, soulful and unique and stylish and blah, blah, blah when describing this guy, but, I really can't help it. He just was what he was, and he is what he is, and he's one of my favorite artists. I don't know if I can describe him. I think he's an example of how music should stand on his own, because Bryan Ferry, even if he's a rock star, he's too much of an original to fit even into that mold, even into alternative. He's just Bryan Ferry, and on his birthday, I wanted to wish Bryan Ferry a very happy one, and keep on doing what you do. I love it.